are gathered in your name, lifting our hands in praise. We are gathered in your name, lifting our hands in praise, and we rejoice in your presence, oh God. You've come. We rejoice in your presence, oh God. We are gathered in your name, lifting our hands in praise. We are gathered in your name, lifting our hands in praise, and we rejoice in your presence, oh God. You've come. We rejoice in your presence, oh God. Jesus good, don't you know? Ain't Jesus good? Ain't it so? Ain't Jesus good? Sing it, hallelujah. I just wanna praise Him forever again. He gave me life when I was dying. He gave me peace when I was at war. He loves me so, and He always will. I just wanna praise Him forever again. Sing, ain't Jesus good? Ain't Jesus good? Don't you know? Ain't Jesus good? Ain't it so? Ain't Jesus good? Sing it, hallelujah. I just wanna praise Him forever again. He filled me up when I was in me so, and He always will. I just wanna praise Him forever again. Ain't Jesus good? Don't you know? Ain't Jesus good? Ain't it so? Ain't Jesus good? Singing hallelujah. I just wanna praise Him forever. I just wanna praise Him. I just wanna praise Him forever again. Lord Jesus, you are so good. You gave us life when we were dying. You freed us when we were slaves. And we love you so much. We just want to come to you with open hearts and open minds again this morning. We praise you. We love you. Amen. Well, hey, if you're following along in the chronological Bible, we're coming up. We're starting on week 9 this week. For those of you that are reading along, I said before, it takes about 10 minutes a day on average to read the Bible in a year. It's not that long when you think about it. You've got 10 minutes. So we sent out a list of the readings if you want to read along. But if not, that's okay too. But where that leaves us this week is in the book of Numbers, chapters 6 through 28. And you know, anytime there's a book of the Bible with the name of Numbers, I'm a little worried. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. It was 32,000 of these and 16,000 of these, and you got to do this way, and then you need 5 of these and 1 of these. And you know, last week David got just into the beginning of Numbers, but he's coming out of Leviticus, and Leviticus is kind of the same way, but it's got Numbers in it, but it's talking about the order of things, the priestly way of things. And one of the things that he said last week is we see through the Old Testament, woven through all the rules and regulations, this deeper message about obedience. And it's not systematic stuff, this religion, although we do need order, right? If we just be obedient to the Lord, the rest falls into place. And I just thought that was really good that he said last week. And so that said, this particular part of Numbers, this is the meat of the book of Numbers, quite a bit of it, right through the middle of it, 6 through 28 chapters. So I'm going to skip over a lot of the regulatory stuff and a lot of this guy, this, and he begat this, and they gave 10,000 these and stuff, because there's a lot of other good things that are happening in here. So I'm just going to talk about the stories and the action parts, and you're going to have to keep up because there is a lot. Chapter 6 talks about Nazirite vows. We don't have time to talk about that today, but if you're interested, that is a vow that men or women can take, and it's a very interesting way to dedicate yourself to the Lord for your life or just for a season of your life. Very, very interesting. So you can bookmark that one to read and study on your own later if you're thinking about that. But also in chapter 6, we get the priestly blessing. And this is a common blessing that we're used to hearing. And so 6:22 says, the Lord spoke to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, may Yahweh bless you and protect you. May Yahweh make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh look with favor on you and give you peace. In this way they will pronounce my name over the Israelites, and I will bless them. That was the priestly blessing that God told Moses to tell Aaron and all the priests to pray over the Israelites. Moving on, chapter 9. This is an interesting part in chapter 9, guidance by the cloud. Excuse me. 9:15, I want to read a little bit here. It says, on the day the tabernacle was set up. Now remember, we need some context. I just jumped right into this thing. They're in the wilderness. They have crossed the Dead Sea, and they're making their way, but they don't have this big setup or anything. They've got this tabernacle that they break down and they set back up as they move, right? On the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, and it appeared like fire above the tabernacle from evening until morning. It remained that way continuously. The cloud would cover it, appearing like fire at night. And when the cloud was lifted up above the tent, the Israelites would set out. And at the place where the cloud stopped, there the Israelites camped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at the Lord's command, they camped. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they camped. And you can talk about the cloud and the fire, but I just really want to talk about a way to live our life, right? When the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, the Israelites did not set out. But when it lifted, they did set out. And I'm always wanting to know what's next. I got to have this plan here. But what a way. They didn't know every morning. They looked up and then, the cloud's moving. Let's get to work, break down this thing and let's get moving, And when it stopped, it stopped. And they stayed. And sometimes it says later in there they may have stayed for a couple of months. Sometimes it says it was maybe just a day or something. They didn't know. And it's just the way it was. But that's a great way to live our life, right? Just follow the Lord. When He moves, we move. When He stays, we stay. It's hard to do. Numbers 11. My Bible gives, which by the way, pretty much everything I'll be reading out of the HCSB, the Holman Christian Standard. If you're looking along digitally and you want to be word for word with me, look for HCSB. But Numbers 11, it has a heading in there. It says complaints about hardship, and this is a theme over and over again. We read about how they complained about what was going on, right? And it's still a theme today, right? We just complain about hardships all the time, don't we? It's just something that we do. Numbers 11, 1-3 says, now the people began complaining openly before the Lord about hardship. When the Lord heard, His anger burned, and fire from the Lord blazed among them and consumed the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was named Taberah, because the Lord's fire had blazed among them. Sometimes when we complain, we just have no reason to complain, right? God has given us everything that we need, but the devil creeps in and he just tells us, well, look at what that person has, right? That other person has more than you, but you're better than that person, so you deserve what they've got and a little more, right? I hear that sometimes. And I get convinced that one of my wants is actually a need. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I need that. It's like, well, no, you want that, right? My kids used to say that all the time. I need it, Dad. Oh, you want it. You don't need it. And so we complain when what we want feels like a need. And in this passage, God's anger literally burns. It breaks out in the camp. A fire breaks out. But I want you to, if you're following along in verse 1 there, it says, the Lord blazed. Where did the fire break out? It consumed the outskirts of the camp. I just think it's interesting. God let that fire break out, but it didn't break out in the middle. It didn't consume all the important stuff. It consumed the outskirts. And I got to imagine if there was some place in the camp where some shady stuff was going on, it was probably out there, right? Out on the edges. God will let a fire burn in our lives, but it's still controlled, right? He's still burning up maybe the things that are going to give us some perspective, right? He's not vindictive. He's not going to take away the things that we need, but He may let a fire burn just to say, okay, you think you've got it bad, but let me just take away some of this other stuff here and focus on the core things. In Numbers 12, we get to a story about Miriam and Aaron. They're a husband and wife, and they rebel. There's a chain of command in the Bible here, especially. You had Moses. There was God, and then Moses, And then Aaron and Miriam were right underneath him, and then they kind of spread it out underneath that. And it's a very effective way to lead, right? This chain of command, we see it all the time in the world around it. Our military uses it, right? Our workplaces have some version of it. Typically, you've got the owner and then a manager, and then you've got managers under those people that manage other people, and it's an effective way, right? It's why that still exists. But in this strategy, at some point, often it breaks down, and it's usually somebody that's not at the top that thinks they can do it better, right? I got to pass along news from Moses that I don't like to people below me, and now I'm getting people mad at me, so now I'm going to turn on the people above me, right? And this is kind of what happens. For whatever reason, Aaron and Miriam rebel, and they say, hey, Moses, God speaks through us too, And they start calling him out, and they challenge his authority. And God fixes this really quick. In chapter 12, verse 10, it says, and as the cloud moved away from the tent, Miriam's skin suddenly became diseased, as white as snow. And when Aaron turned toward her, he saw that she was diseased, and said to Moses, my Lord. His tone changed real quick, didn't it? Moses, my Lord, please don't hold against us this sin we have so foolishly committed. Please don't let her be like a dead baby whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's wombs. And then Moses cried out, God, please heal her. And God did, and there's some other stuff there that happens in the passage, but God heals Miriam, and he restores the chain of command pretty quickly through that process. I love, for one, that Aaron immediately repented. He said, just please, don't hold this sin against us. He admitted it, and I believe that is why God healed Miriam. And we're going to get to a second event where the chain of command breaks down, but there's a different outcome here in the book of Numbers today, so I'm going to keep cruising. Numbers 13, Moses sends out 12 scouts to look at the promised land. Now remember, they're in this in-between phase. I'm going to tell you the ending of the story. They don't do it right, and they end up spending 40 years in this wilderness, but right now they're just making their way through. Now this 40-year journey through the wilderness, I read a study one time that said if you made this journey across the wilderness, they estimated how long it would take to get from the other side of the Red Sea to the Promised Land. And anybody have any guesses on how long of a journey that would take?
A week.
Huh? A week. It took them 40 years though, Dennis. You think it's really just a week? Yeah, it was 11 days. This guy estimated a group that large with all their animals and everything else, kids and children. If they had just start to finish, it would have taken 11 days to get there, and it took them 40 years. All right. So let's read about what happened. What chapter am I in? In chapter 13. Yeah. Verse 26. So Moses sent 12 guys out to scout out the land. It says, the men came back to Moses, Aaron, and the entire Israelite community in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back a report for them and the whole community, and they showed them the fruit of the land. Okay, remember, the fruit was amazing. They were living in the wilderness. This was the promised land, right? And they reported to Moses, we went to the land where you sent us, and indeed it is flowing with milk and honey, and here is some of its fruit. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. We also saw the descendants of Anak, those were giants. The Amalekites are living in the land of Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan. So they're just naming all these bad guys that live all throughout this territory. Then Caleb quieted the people in the presence of Moses and said, we must go up and take possession of the land because we can certainly conquer it. But the men who had gone up with him responded, we can't go up against the people because they are stronger than we are. So they gave a negative report to the Israelites about the land they had scouted. The land we passed through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are of great size. We even saw the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak, come from Nephilim. To ourselves we seem like grasshoppers, and we must have seemed the same to them. And the whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. all the Israelites complained. Boy, they complained a lot. And they complained about Moses and Aaron. And the whole community told them, if we had only died in the land of Egypt. Now, you remember in Egypt, they were slaves. They were worked day to night. Their sons had to be killed. They had to gather their own straw for the bread. I mean, you remember this whole thing. I mean, it was awful in Egypt. And they're just remembering it fondly, maybe just a few months later. I don't know how long it was later, but it wasn't that much later. If only we had died in Egypt. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And so they said to one another, let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. Man, sometimes I want to go back to my captors as well. When Jesus frees us, we just, we get scared sometimes and we just want to go back to our captors. And that is not the lesson here. Moses and Aaron fell down on their faces in front of the whole assembly. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, were among those who scouted the land. So 2 of the 12 were good. They tore their clothes and they said to the entire community, the land we passed through and explored is an extremely good land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into the land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. But don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people, for we will devour them. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid. They said so many times, don't be afraid. What a great lesson there from Joshua and Caleb. And I believe the next part of their story doesn't happen until after today, so we won't get that, but I'm setting it up for whoever's going to preach about that next. In Numbers 14, it says, in verse 22, it says, they tested me these 10 times, and they did not obey, and they will not see the promised land. That's something where God says, they tested me these 10 times, and I didn't go back through and count how many times they complained or how many times they said, let's go back to Egypt or whatever, but I think it was probably 10, or maybe it was just a big number that God was saying. They tested me 10 times. Like, if I reach the number I'm counting, and if I get to 10, you're done, right? And he said, they will not see the promised land, and that's where their 40-year wilderness journey begins through that process. And the point about all this is that the Israelites had been slaves for 400 years in the land where they were before. And then they got this newfound freedom. I mean, 400 years, that's generations upon generations. They had never known anything but slavery. And they got this newfound freedom, and they started making these mistakes, right? They just complained, and they just, and I look at my life, like, I had kids when I was very young, and Heather did too. That's how it works. And they kept us busy, the kids did. And we were also we didn't have any money, we were broke, like, to be honest. So our circumstances boxed us into a way to where we could not stray very far from the Lord, right? We were young, we had no money, we had no time. So I just walked very closely in my life with the Lord, not necessarily because I was a great person, but because God knew how much he could give me. He knew if he gave me more, I was going to wander off, right? And if I look back on it negatively, I can say, boy, what a slave God made me. Why didn't I make more money at that time? Or why did I have to be so young when the kids came and I just didn't have any idea what I was doing? But looking at it now in perspective, I appreciate that he just kept me so close to him. He just kept me boxed in, right? I had less freedom, sure, but I was and am close to the Lord, but I was just close to the Lord in a different way at that time. But as God does, he frees us. And the kids got older, and they started going to do their own thing, and Heather graduated college, and she got a job, and we started having more and doing more, and then I started getting outside of maybe things. God would say to things that maybe I knew. I'd say, oh, let me just wander off over here, and I'd have to come back, and I kind of appreciated those times where God just kept me close to him through a slave through my circumstance. But God didn't want me to be a slave. God wanted me to be free, and he knew I'd wander, and he knew just how much to give me and to bring me back in. And that's a process that I'm going through to this day as I stand here. I wander, and then I look back and I say, oh Lord, I'm learning. But he would so much rather I do that. He knows I'm going to make mistakes, but he's going to let me do just enough to come back to him. So the men Moses sent to scout out the land returned, and they incited the entire community to complain about him by spreading a negative report about the land. Those men who spread the negative report about the land were struck down by the Lord. Only Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of those men who went to scout out the land. So 10 of the 12 were struck down by the Lord for spreading a false report about the promised land. Those 10 guys, they kind of make me think about fake news these days, right? They came back and they were scared. And because they were scared of it, they came and they told the whole community, they incited this rebellion, and they said, no, we can't go ahead because we're scared. We're going to scare everyone else into not following into the promised land. They said it was worse than it actually was to get people to do what they wanted to do. And boy, that sounds a little familiar these days, doesn't it? Well, some time passes and the Israelites are back in the wilderness and they're just making this loop. I kind of just think of them walking around in a big circle over 40 years going, we're going to get there, and they don't know where they're going. And here in chapter 16, we get this second challenge to Moses' authority, to God's authority, really. And this time it's people a little bit lower down in the chain. It's some people below Aaron. In Numbers 16, a guy named Korah, not Korah, different, spelled with a K, decides he's had enough of Moses' poor leadership. And he says some things that we hear from people sometimes whenever they want to steal some power. He says, you know what? Everyone in this community is holy, and the Lord is among all of us. So why do you, Moses, exalt yourself above the Lord's assembly? And Moses did not do that. Moses was appointed time and time again by different ways that God showed who was in charge. And so this guy, Korah, is seeking to take down a bad power system. And when people start doing that, why do they do that? They don't do it because they don't like the guy above them. They do it because they want the power for themselves, right? You incite these people below you to help you overthrow the people above you, and then you go, well, I guess we need a new leader, guys. I'll do it since this was my idea and all, and I'm so benevolent and wonderful. And that's what this guy's plan was. And he did not have an experience of repentance like Aaron. Whenever Aaron saw Miriam's skin change color, this guy did not repent. He challenged Moses, and you can read the story. Again, we don't have time, so much to cover, but basically the earth just opens up and swallows this guy and 249 other people that were priests in the leadership system, and the ground just swallows them, and they're just gone. And then a plague breaks out and kills thousands of people in the camp shortly after. And I believe those are the people that God said, no, these people are going to be trouble. And they're just gone. All those people. And it's uncomfortable hearing a story like that. You go, well, there's times where I've been, naysayer to the systems that I'm a part of that I think could be better. And when we see these systems around us, like I mentioned earlier, we've got this chain of command. We see it at our jobs, in our military, in our government, in our families. We have these systems. And in Corinthians, we read about unity yet diversity in the body. And I think this sheds some light on maybe why people are above people or below people. It says, for as the body is one and has many parts, all the parts of that body, though many, are one body, so also is Christ. For we are all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jew or Greek or slaves or free. We're made to drink of one spirit, so the body is not one part, but many. And if the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, in spite of this, it still belongs to the body. And if the ear would say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong, it too belongs. And if the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? And if the whole body was an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But God has placed each one of the parts in one body, just as he wanted. And if they were all the same part, where would the body be? There are many parts, yet one body. So the eye cannot say, I don't need you, to the hand. Or the head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. But even more, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are necessary. And the parts of the body that we think to be less honorable, we clothe those with great honor. But our presentable parts have no need of clothing. Instead, God has put the body together, giving great honor to the less honorable, so that there would be no division in the body, but the members would have the same concern for each other. For if one member suffers, all suffer with it. And if one is honored, all members rejoice with it. I kind of like to think of that as how we are in the chain of command. Maybe we're at the bottom. Maybe we're doing things that we're just tired of doing, and we feel like the people above us are just making us do things. Well, maybe we're less honorable, but when the whole body is honored, we're all honored. And when one suffers, we all suffer. The world is never going to be fair, right? It just won't. It's fallen. If it was perfect, we'd already be in heaven, and we know that we aren't. And here in our country, we have this separated system of religious and government, right? In Moses' time, he was the spiritual leader and he was the governmental leader, right? Here in America, those things are separated, right? And just quick note, sorry, I'm going to get on a soapbox here, but when somebody tells you that we have separate church and state, and to keep your church out of their state, just remind them that our forefathers created it so that the government couldn't get into the church, okay? They didn't create it to protect the government from the church. They created it to protect the church from the government, right? And they knew, our founding fathers knew that this system that they created required moral, good people to be a part of it, or it would fall apart. And we can see that is happening, right? But I want to share a quick story with you real quick about America. Speaking of America, I read something this week. I have an app that just gives me random different things to pray for. And one prayer thing that I got this week was talking about praying for people in China. It says, technology ushers in a new wave of persecution in China. China's use of a technologically advanced system of control and surveillance is on the rise, it says. A recent report estimates there are now 415 million surveillance cameras in the country. This impacts the church, as registered churches are required to allow cameras in services to monitor congregants. One state-sanctioned church in Xinjiang is also known to require congregants to line up for facial recognition checks. China is also rolling out a countrywide social credit system, SCS, that will allow authorities to reward good citizenship and punish bad citizenship. So they get points based on whether they're good or bad by Chinese standards. It says already one community has reportedly decided to add penalties for those who illegally spread Christianity. It's easy to see how surveillance technology can be used in tandem with the SCS to make everyday life very difficult for anyone the Chinese government deems insufficiently Chinese, including Christians. Please pray for believers to be ambassadors of the gospel in their daily lives. And I thought, as I was reading this about being a complainer and thinking about our country and just how it's just all falling apart, I was like, man, we could have it a lot worse. We could have to line up for facial recognition scans when we come in the building, and then we could be a point system. And now we're only going to get, maybe you don't get as good a food with your government ration if you have too many bad points for showing up at the wrong church and getting your face scanned, right? So God might just be letting some fires break out in the outskirts of our Americanized Christianity camp that we've got going on right now. So for one, be in prayer for China, but also understand maybe I'm just being a complainer. Oh, we're getting there. I'm going to have to just book it. All right, number 17, the rod of God. Aaron is singled out as the true priest. That's a really cool story. You can read it on your own. Numbers 20, the water from the rock. You may remember earlier in Exodus 17, Moses hit the rock so that water would come out of it. And then in Numbers 20, God tells Moses to go and speak to the rock. And Moses goes, and he's so frustrated with them. They're just whining and complaining. And it says, Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he had commanded him. Told him, take the staff and speak to the rock. Moses summoned the assembly in front of the rock, and he said to them, listen, you rebels. He didn't tell them to say that. He said, must we bring water out of this rock for you? He didn't say we. God said, I'm going to bring water out of the rock. You take the rod and you talk to it. Moses said, listen, you rebels, must we, me and Aaron, bring water out of this rock for you? And he raised his hand and he struck it twice. And a great amount of water gushed out. But the Lord said, because you did not trust me to show my holiness in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this assembly into this land. And so that is what God is saying is, Moses, you're going to die at the end of the 40-year mark. You won't go into the promised land. And that's where Joshua and Caleb kind of take over at that time. But, I think about this instance with Moses hitting the rock, and I think, God tells him, because you did not trust me to show my holiness, right? Moses wasn't just going to talk to that rock. He wasn't just going to stand there. He had experience. He knew hitting a rock made water come out of it. And sometimes the most faithful thing that we can do is to not take action, and that is hard, right? We want to grab something, and we just want to just power it to the ground and take a hold of it. I want to go fix things. But sometimes faithfulness requires us to only move when he tells us to move, to stand and to speak, or to let God take the action. That's hard to do. Numbers 21 talks about the bronze snake. No time for that. Numbers 22 through 24 is Balaam's donkey and the curse. So when the Israelites were wandering around out in the wilderness, they got close to some other people, the Midianites and the Moabites. And those two nations specifically got worried about this giant nation of people. I mean, it was hundreds of thousands or probably millions when you counted the mixed multitude of people out in the wilderness. And that doesn't go unnoticed. And so they called this guy Balaam, who was just famous for being able to cast curses on people. And Balaam was not a good dude. He was just a dude who was spiritually sensitive to things, and he seemed to have some powers. I don't think they were God given. I guess maybe they were God allowed. And Balaam, the bad guys come to Balaam and they say, we need you to curse these people. And God comes to Balaam and he says, do not curse those people. And Balaam's like, okay, he knew, even though he wasn't an Israelite or a chosen one, he knew. And so he said, I can't go with you guys. Well, they finally talk him into it. He says, okay, but I can only say what God allows me to say. I just need y'all to know that right now. And they go. And in Numbers 22, verse 22, chapter 22, verse 22, it says, God was incensed that Balaam decided to go along with these guys. And the angel of the Lord took his stand on the path to oppose him. And Balaam was riding his donkey, and his two servants were with him. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing on the path with a drawn sword, she turned off the path and went into the field. So Balaam hit her to return her to the path. And then the angel of the Lord came and stood in a narrow passage with a stone wall on either side, and the donkey saw the angel and pressed herself against the wall, squeezing Balaam's foot against it. So he hit her again. And the angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in a narrow place, and there was no room to turn right or left. And when the donkey saw the angel, she crouched down under Balaam, and he became furious and beat the donkey. And then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said, what have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times? There's a lesson in that. God can even use a donkey to speak, so don't be too proud of anybody that gets up and speaks to you. We're just glorified donkeys. Balaam answered the donkey. It doesn't say how long he stood there with his mouth open, but it just says he answered, you make me look like a fool. If I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you now. But the donkey said, am I not the donkey you've ridden all your life until today? Have I ever treated you this way before? No, he replied. This is just a hilarious conversation. And the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, And he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the path with a drawn sword. And Balaam knelt and bowed his face to the ground. And the angel of the Lord said, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Look, I came up to oppose you because you were doing evil. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she had not, I would have killed you and let her live." Balaam said to the angel, "I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the path, and now, if it's evil in your sight, I will go back. I'm not going to go curse the Israelites. I'm just going to go home." And the angel says, "No, you know what? Go ahead and go on." So he does. And all this big series of events happens and stuff, and you'll have to read it in Numbers 22, 23, and 24. But Balaam ends up pronouncing a blessing on the Israelites 3 times, right in front of the kings, these people of the Midianites and the Moabites. And they're great blessings. The first one's kind of good, and the guy says, "Hey man, don't you know, you're supposed to come, I paid you to say the other thing. You're supposed to give those to us, and you did." And Balaam's like, "Look, I told you I can only say what God lets me say." And 2 more times it goes down. And then finally, let me see. The 4th blessing, he lays out this powerful oracle about the Lord's people, just sets them up. And not only that, he says the Moabites are going down, and the Midianites are going down, and the Jebusites, they're going down. And that's where we need to end today. But I just want to say, no matter who the enemy brings against God's people, ultimately, they can only go as far as God allows them. And in some cases, God uses the very people that were meant to destroy us to bless us. He uses the very people, the bad people, to destroy the other bad people. And all we have to do is just sit there and watch. I have seen that in my life. It's a powerful and amazing thing. When God turns the bad guys on each other and we don't lift a hand, it's amazing. We don't have to worry about the bad guys and what power they have or what they might do to us. God is in charge. We talked a lot about this law and order, right, and structure, and how sometimes we are slaves in the authority structure. And sometimes we see people that challenge it and they're forgiven, and sometimes we people challenge it and they're eliminated. And there's 2 events, right, with the challenge. Aaron and Miriam challenged him, and then Aaron repented right away, and Moses loved him very much, and he prayed that God would heal her, and God did. And the event with the other guy and his followers, they were not repentant. They were not spared. God knew their hearts, and he caused this event to happen. And we live in this system where we have leaders that are not our religious leaders. And we don't need religious leaders anymore, thanks to God sending his son Jesus. We have a high priest in Jesus that takes us straight to God. We don't need any other human leaders. We need Jesus alone. And Micah talks about the judgment of unjust leaders in his book. He says they will hate good and they will love evil. And we see that sometimes. And in the book of 2 Timothy, and this is where we'll end, he writes, "But know this, difficult times will come in the last days, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, without love for what is good, traitors, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to the form of godliness but denying its power. Avoid these people." And it continues, "Evil people and impostors will become worse, deceiving and being deceived. But as for you," and here's what you need to hear, "as for you, continue in what you have learned and firmly believed. You know those who taught you, and you know that from childhood you have known the sacred scriptures, which you were able to give wisdom for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus." So all of those things, even though we can go through there and we can say, "Yep, boastful. Yeah, this is end times, right? Irreconcilable, slanderers, without self-control, brutal." And we say, "Yeah, they're all here." He says, "But as for you, continue in what you have learned. You know those who have taught you, and you know that from childhood you've known the scriptures, which are able to give you wisdom for salvation through your faith in Christ Jesus. So I want to pray Aaron's prayer of blessing over us to close today. May Yahweh bless you and protect you. May Yahweh make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh look with favor on you and give you peace. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I feel like I talked 100 miles an hour.